So we will now open the floor to questions. If you have questions, please come down and line up behind one of the two mics. I'll try to go back and forth fairly. And so we'll begin to the right. Please identify yourself and reduce the comment to a minimum and the question as precise as you can make it. And if you have a particular speaker you're addressing it to, you can indicate that. Otherwise, it'll just be a free-for-all.
Good morning. Is this on? Oh, is it on? Okay. Good morning. Hi, my name is Ashley, and I'm a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby, and there are about 8 or 10 of us here, and my question is for Congressman Inglis. I just wanted to thank you for a fresh perspective from an audience that we often don't hear from, and I'm interested in your ideas of what we can do to bring on unlikely climate heroes and make alliances in unlikely places. What is it that we need to do to reach out to conservatives so that we can work together towards a revenue-neutral carbon tax?
I think, first of all, realize that they are the indispensable partners for action. One way to do this, if you're on the environmental left, is just say, listen, here's our plan. We're going to run up the numbers in the House and the Senate, and we're going to jam this thing through. How's that working out for you with redistricting? Not very well. So if you want to act within the next 20 years, behold your indispensable partner. So we got to find them. We got to go to them and say, we like you. You're neat. Your ideas are cool. Let's see how they can work to solve this problem. And we'll adjust our rhetoric. This is what I think the environmental left needs to say. We'll adjust our rhetoric so it isn't immediately offensive to you. And we'll respect you as people who have a different view, a different worldview than we do. Then we'd be in business, right? But as soon as you tell people you don't like them, they really don't want to hear anything else you got to say. And so we got to go to them and say, you're pretty cool. I like you. And then we can have a conversation. So it really is, it's what we learned in kindergarten, really. It's just be nice. So I hope that's a little bit too general, but that's really, it starts at that very fundamental level, I think.
Hello, thank you for your talks. My name's Eric. I'm a PhD candidate here in philosophy, and my question's for Professor Mendelsohn. I was kind of surprised to hear you say that we're not sure if 1 degree warming has caused a lot of harm, because I know the latest report said that just one fact that I happen to remember is the number of heat-related deaths have increased, and it more than accounts for the reduction in the number of cold-related deaths. So it just got me thinking about cost-benefit analysis, and one of the big criticisms of that model is that it's easy to externalize costs. And so sitting here in New York City, it's sort of a privilege of affluent nations to talk about this in terms of dollars when a lot of people are paying in terms of lives. So I'm just wondering, how do you account for those kind of external costs?
Well, everything about climate change is external costs, so you have to work very hard to measure them. One of the things that makes climate change very different from controlling criteria pollutants, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, particulates, is that the criteria pollutants kill people. Climate change really doesn't kill people. That's not the problem with climate change. The problem with climate change is it's going to change all the ecosystems in the world. And it turns out we don't value that quite as much as we value losing lives. So to try to turn climate change into somehow a health problem is going to misfire, because it doesn't actually lead to that much health losses. And attributing sort of the heat wave deaths in Europe in 1993 or wherever they were to sort of climate change is actually not quite getting the point, because that was an extreme event that is never going to happen again. Europe's never going to let 20,000 of their elderly die just because everybody's off on vacation in August. That isn't something that they're likely to do a second time. They've already realized that was a huge mistake, and they've taken precautions.
So now we'll have a question from the left wing of the House.
Hi there. My name's Kathy McConnell, and I'm also a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby. But my question is for Dr. Mendelsohn. You said that 4%, if we can hold the increase of global temperature to 4% centigrade, we will be able to escape catastrophic changes. And as you know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said 2 degrees centigrade is really what we should be focusing on. And I wanted to know where you got the information that 4 degrees centigrade is something tolerable. And do you value things like losing biodiversity and watching all our conservation programs basically go down the tubes as climate changes and the animals and plants that have been saved so far can't follow the climate as it changes so rapidly?
So I guess you could turn that question around. Where did the IPCC get those ridiculous numbers? Basically, as far as I can tell, there's no justification for shooting at 2 degrees. That if you look at most of the things that they're telling you you'd buy with 2 degrees, you're actually buying them with 4 degrees. It's having climate change dramatically. That's actually where you'll see large losses in the biodiversity. If you look at ecosystem models of what would happen with 4 degrees, it actually they predict that ecosystems will expand, productivity will go up, and there'll be more biomass on the planet. In other words, if you actually look at the science is not saying 4 degrees is going to cause catastrophe. And there's absolutely no evidence that 2 degrees will. In fact, if you let the plants and the trees vote, they would vote for 4 degrees. They'd vote for a CO2-enriched world that was a little bit warmer, that had a little more humidity in it. They'd like that. So I think it's a misconception. A lot of people have a misconception that just because there's a change, the change is necessarily for the worse. It actually doesn't look like it's actually going to be that way.
Well, I'm not sure the animals have as much leeway as the plants do. Because
actually, the animals have more leeway than the plants. So what we're worried about is the plants. The plants don't make it, the animals aren't going to make it either. But that's what the ecosystem models are saying. So there's a lot of information about what could go wrong in the IPCC reports, but if you actually look at what we think is going to happen, it's not quite as a devastating story. Now, if you're allowing things to get to be 6 degrees, 8 degrees, 10 degrees, yes, that could be incredibly dangerous. And that's precisely why I think it's important that we cap this. We don't just let this go unchecked. So don't misread me into saying, well, 4 degrees is selling the planet down the tubes. I think actually 4 degrees is saving the planet. And what I'm afraid of is if we say it's 2 degrees, we're not going to actually do anything. Because 2 degrees is way too expensive, we'll just give up. And then we won't even stop it at 4 degrees. So what I'm concerned about is that the 2-degree target of the IPCC is a death sentence for actually doing anything about it. Death sentence for mitigation.
Okay, next question.
So my name is Joel Towers. I'm the Dean of Parsons, and I have Bevis's job in the next panel. So you're setting us a high standard. I appreciate it. And in typical new school fashion, I think, though, Congressman Inglis might have appeared to be the easy target of the conversation. It's probably Dr. Mendelsohn that's going to get most of the questions. So I'm going to direct my question to you as well, if I might. You allow that economists are not particularly good at predicting the future, although you've just made many statements about the future with a great deal of fact asserted in them. So I'm going to ask you to look to the past a little bit and unpack the data that suggests costs and benefits are so out of line. In particular, the assessment that 1 degree Celsius change has produced so little damage. You've been asked that a couple times already, I think, to some degree. But I'm curious what gets left out of the equations when we say there's only been $50 billion worth of damage estimated at 1 degree Celsius. Here in New York alone, there's $51 billion worth of appropriations just to deal with Hurricane Sandy. So what are you saying doesn't count when you get to 50 billion at 1 degree Celsius?
So Hurricane Sandy is a serious issue. It caused an enormous amount of damage. But it turns out it's part of our current climate. You don't need climate change to have hurricanes. We've had hurricanes in New York, in the United States, as far back as we have any measurements of the United States. So it's the fact that Sandy came and struck, one of the mistakes people are making is they somehow think that if they pay for money on climate change, we're no longer going to have any weather. But no, we're going to still have weather. If you stay with what you've got today, you still have weather. You're still going to have weather effects, weather damages. So you're going to still have hurricanes today. The concern we're worried about is if you have climate change, how will the hurricanes change? It's not that we won't have any hurricanes if we don't spend any money on this. What we're concerned about is that if you let climate change go unchecked, we think hurricanes will get more serious and they'll cause more damage in the future. But those are all things that are being measured in these analyses. When I'm saying that the damages are modest, it's counting everything we know today about what we think climate change itself is going to actually cause. And it's what we're trying to get, what the analysis I'm trying to get you to think about is how much worse is it than our current climate? It's not that the other choice is no climate at all. The other choice is what we have to live with anyway. And Hurricane Sandy, unfortunately, is what we have to live with anyway.
But your data doesn't include impacts that strengthened Hurricane Sandy already as a result of climate change, is my question.
When Hurricane Sandy actually arrived in New York City, it wasn't even a hurricane by then. So to think that Hurricane Sandy is somehow strengthened, there's just no evidence of it. To look at the United States and to say, wow, it seems like the United States is getting creamed by hurricanes, that is actually a good observation. Because one of the things that we're shocked by is how much more vulnerable the United States is than any other country in the entire world. We have about 3 to 5 times more damage per hurricane than any other country in the world. Counting for all the things that are in harm's way, it's still, we have this enormously high level. So why is the United States so vulnerable to hurricanes? And I'd actually say that's because of a maladaptation by the United States, that we actually have subsidized insurance for flooding, and we have all this excessive relief after hurricanes cause. It turns out there's absolutely no incentive for anybody to adapt, given how much we actually pay after the fact.
The storms know that's where the money is.
The storms know that's where the money is.
Hi, I'm Ron. I want to thank you, Mr. Inglis. You've encapsulated something that I've been trying to explain to my friends, but maybe with your words it'll get across. Thank you very much. But my question is for Christina, and in terms of investing in renewable energies, I don't have any numbers, but I know that there's subsidies for fuel companies for exploration and this sort of thing. And I was wondering, how does that, you hadn't mentioned anything like that for renewables, and how does that factor in, and where are we with that? And are there things available, and just put that into the formula?
Thank you. Yeah, the actual data on what existing subsidies are to fossil fuel companies versus renewables is very hard to get one's hands on. But some Citibank analysis that was done recently on just the renewables market, looking at the sort of long-term lifetime cycle costs of electricity production by various sources of energy, showed that even on an unsubsidized basis at this stage, solar and wind are highly competitive, which is great news. What's not so good news is that we know there are still massive subsidies going into the fossil fuel industry globally. They're not very easy to identify. And what's difficult in the United States, I think from a policy and regulatory perspective, is that it varies state by state. Investors have had a lot of uncertainty over what tariff and subsidy regimes are at one point in time and what they're going to be at another point in time. So that has hampered the market to some extent. So there's certainly room for a more unified approach to.
How come they're not identifiable? Is that because maybe there's international subsidies we don't know about, or?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Or is there private subsidies somehow, or?
Well, 75% of fossil fuel reserves are owned by the states around the world, governments. So the accounting is quite opaque, and I can't even say I begin to understand the full scope and nature of the subsidies that go into the market.
Good morning. My name is Judith Weiss. I'm a professor of biology at Rutgers University. My question is also for Dr. Mendelsohn. I'm not sure what ecosystem models you've looked at, but the ecological predictions for a 4-degree rise in temperature are what I would consider quite devastating. And I wonder, in your cost-benefit analysis, if you have considered costs of extinction of ocean acidification, which no one has talked about thus far today, which will damage the ocean ecosystems enormously. With a 4-degree rise in temperature, the pH of the oceans will go down enough that probably, huge species of shellfish will no longer be able to survive. And whether you've considered in your cost-benefit analysis on land, the amount of land that is currently productive that will become subject to drought and desertification and will no longer be productive. And I could give a whole list of ecological things, but I won't. The list goes on and on.
Okay, so I was relying on quantitative dynamic ecology models, which is quite different from the rhetoric you often hear from ecological models, which is more or less what you've been talking about. The quantitative ecological models suggest that forests are going to expand, ecosystems are going to expand, desert land's going to shrink, the productivity is going to go up. It's exactly the opposite of what you said. So there's a disconnect between the science that's behind this and the rhetoric that I tend to hear from ecologists, basically. The science there's something missing. And as far as I can tell, ecologists actually need to learn more about what their own colleagues are saying about what these climate change effects are going to be.
I've been reading papers on this for years and have come across relatively few with the optimistic scenario that you described.
From the left?
The United States developed solar panels the early 80s in Pittsburgh. I was working there as a grad student, and it took 30 years until it came on board, and they had developed it strictly for the Libya oil crisis. And if Department of Energy is constantly cut, and they have to do regulations that only last as long as they're in power, I worry about long-term sustainability. And my question really is to Christina. She showed a chart of the tremendous investment of China in solar panels, but the chart did not show what percentage of that is used to build empty cities in their campaign to bring the rural farmers to the cities. So their growth rate is phenomenal, and as a percentage, I question whether the growth in solar panels is being used to build empty cities and growth for growth's sake.
Yeah, I think you're raising the important question of some negative trends within the clean energy market itself, or how clean is the clean energy market.
Does it replace existing energy? That's the old energy, or is it just marketing,
Yeah, clearly China is investing massive sums into solar energy. Some of the technologies and companies they're supporting are more sustainable than others. And I'm not an expert on the Chinese solar industry. It is clearly a significant responsibility on the part of investors and investment managers when creating clean tech portfolios to make sure you really know what companies you're investing in, what geographies and what localities, and whether or not there are any actual negative externalities being created when trying to solve actually another negative externality. So it's an important point. I don't have a perfect answer, but it's something that is actually being looked at in the clean energy industry quite carefully, I think, by responsible investment managers who are parsing out the responsible players from the irresponsible players.
Maybe the ecologist at the UN has more detailed facts about what's really happening.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Paul Stern. I was on the program yesterday morning, but my question comes from a different place, and it's addressed to Christina and maybe also to Charlotte. At the end of May, I am going back for my 50th college reunion at an elite liberal arts college whose identity is probably immaterial here, but I will be on a program there that will be talking about the issue of green investment in relation to the college endowment, and and options like divesting from fossil fuels, among others. But I hear from the discussions this morning that there are ways to frame this question, and I'm looking for advice on resources and ways to frame the question for a college or university endowment where the trustees probably believe that they are already doing impact investment because they're using this money to provide for need-blind admissions to the college, that people can get a high-level education regardless of income because the endowment has been invested in a traditional way. And I would like some thoughts about how to change that conversation.
You have to tell us what outcome you want before we can tell you how to frame the question.
Well, I want a consideration of investments that put more of a priority on putting money into things that address the climate change problem rather than financial returns, and the stability of financial returns is the only investment criteria.
It's really a great question. I think, the first starting point for the discussion is don't accept any financial models, blind faith, from investment analysts or portfolio managers. Most financial models are backward-looking in nature. They predict returns based on they predict future returns based on past performance. So many traditional classical portfolio analysts will tell you, if you force me to carve something out of the portfolio, it's going to erode the portfolio returns, and it's my fiduciary responsibility to avoid that. And the truth is really something different. It's very important to supplement that kind of analysis with more of a sort of stress test based analysis. So I think the climate arithmetic is a really good starting point for the discussion. How do you think our portfolio would perform in these scenarios? In the scenarios that fossil fuel companies actually were facing a carbon bubble collapse or the bursting of a carbon bubble. It's certainly not the base case scenario for most financial analysts, but it's an important one. The second point, I think, is that is the point I made at the end of my talk. Most portfolio managers are paid fees based on benchmarking themselves against average returns in the market. They care more about how they perform relative to how other investment managers perform than they care about how they do on an absolute basis. So I think you need to supplement the analysis of performance in that respect. I also think there's a lot available. There are a number of investment managers that are actually responding to individual clients saying, I want a carbon-free investment portfolio. So frankly, if you simply look on the web, there are some very reputable, socially responsible investment managers who have offered the analysis and offered the tools on how to extract fossil fuels from your portfolio.
I'd like to interject. I guess the moderator can ask one question, if those waiting don't mind. And this is a question or a proposition that maybe any panelist could comment on. I was really struck by Bob Inglis's phrase, theological rigidity of the environmentalists, because it's something I have long believed. And so taking off from that, the other remarkable thing is that in 2 days, as far as I know, I haven't been here every minute, the word nuclear being radioactive has never been uttered, which is something of a problem, because I think science would suggest that nuclear is a necessary link to getting to an acceptable climate in the planet. In 2012, nuclear provided 64% of all clean energy in the United States. I would say that figure should have been 99%, and I would argue that but for the conservationists' theological rigidity, which has gone on for 20 to 30 years, we would have nuclear today in this country above 80% of all energy, or whatever. Anyway, a high percentage. So the proposition is this. Do you think that in the inner sanctum of the chairman's office at Exxon, at some point in the last 30 years, they were saying to themselves, who needs friends when we have enemies like the conservation movement?
I'll take a shot at it. Yes, maybe so. I think they might be happy with that scenario, because I agree with you. I think that's a kind of observation, Bevis, that would, to the first question from over here, would sort of begin gears moving among conservatives. If they saw the environmental left abandoning this theological rigidity on nuclear, things would start to thaw on the right, because they'd say, okay, now we're talking practicality. When you flip the switch, you want reliable power. The sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow all the time, but you want to flip that switch and have the lights on. Nuclear is a great way to do it. And so if more were heard to say what you just said, Bevis, then we'd be moving somewhere, right? But if I could, just on the theological rigidity, let me just make sure to challenge this. Actually is theological. And this may be a surprise to some, but when Carl Sagan used to say on his show, the cosmos, it's all there is, all there ever was, all there ever will be. You realize that this is a theological statement. It's really a statement from those of us of faith's perspective. It's a statement of non-faith. And so when Carl Sagan uttered those words, he was immediately and gratuitously offending a lot of people I used to represent in the 4th District of South Carolina. And so scientists who go out and use that kind of terminology and insist on it, and really do insist on it, and insist on shaming anybody of the book who would say, no, I really believe in creation, or I believe in intelligent design, or I believe that God intended these things, you're gratuitously offending them. So if there's just an awareness that go there and leave that your evangelism of that position in the closet, and engage your audience saying, listen, I respect your views. You have a view of a creator. Okay, so leave your evangelism at the door about the Carl Sagan point of view and go into the arena respecting the audience. Then the audience can like you and can hear what you're saying. But if you gratuitously offend them right at the start, then I don't hear anything else you got to say. But nuclear is a good place to start. That's a little bit less actually theological, but it is the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Yes, right. So The Nature Conservancy, as you noted, has recently divested from all tar sands and coal investments, which really have no place, right, in a carbon-constrained future. At the same time, we have a very robust program in Pennsylvania and West Virginia and the whole sort of shale region on responsible shale development. As we transition away from a carbon-based fuel economy, natural gas is going to have a huge part to play, and we're of the position that natural gas development is likely to happen, shale gas development, and it could be done in a way that is incredibly carbon intensive with methane emissions and all kinds of really bad impacts. And it could also be done in a way that is not. And it's our job as the Nature Conservancy to help sort of move toward the better alternative. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario in which you make the case that the Nature Conservancy should invest in coal in our endowment or invest in tar sands in our endowment. And yet when we made this decision, Exxon pulled every single one of its trustees who volunteer for our organization. So I'm not entirely sure that even while I'm fully in support of this idea that there is a theological, both big T and small t, right, rigidity to the movement, there's some rigidity on the other side as well, I would say.
Hi, everyone. Oh, is this on? I'm Katie Jones. I'm a candidate for Master of Science in Sustainability Management at Columbia University, and I really enjoyed hearing all of you speak, so thank you. This is building off some of the previous questions, and I think it'll be relevant to multiple speakers. And I was curious if you could talk about some of the challenges in quantifying traditionally non-monetized assets, like ecosystem services, biodiversity, clean water, when creating valuations, whether it's at the national or international level or at a corporate level, and how the precautionary principle comes into play, and whether you think current models underestimate or overestimate the value of these services. Thanks.
Okay. So that's the topic I've spent the last 30 years of my life trying to study. There are ways to try to figure out how much we care about these things. How much you care about outdoor recreation sites, you can reveal by the effort people go to actually go see some of these sites. The fact that there's so much donations given to the Nature Conservancy obviously shows that people put their money where their hearts are, or their mouth is. So there are ways you can actually observe through people's behavior that they care about the environment. And it shows that you need to protect the environment. But the other thing it shows is that some things in the environment are worth a lot more than others. And it's important that people who manage the environment get the prices right. Understand that it's much more important to save maybe some old growth forest than one more hectare of normal forest. You know, that there are things that are very special that we need to be extra careful with. So one of the things about valuation is not just showing that the environment's important, it's also identifying the things which are especially important.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Andrew Schaefer. I'm a personal trainer here in the city. A little out of place maybe, but this may be, I don't know for who, possibly the ladies on the panel. I'm going to put it kind of radically and see what happens. But what if our entire economic model is a part of the problem and is not going to let us solve this? So we have a society that values individual liberty and freedom and economic freedom, the chance to make your own fortune and to secure your own economic future, and we value that highly, as I think Congressman Inglis would agree. Everything I read about sustainability is always about the community. We have to help each other. We have to invest lots of money at zero return or next to no return for people that don't even live with us. There seems to me to be a clash there. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah, this is well, it's a very large question, and I won't do it justice, but I think, you know, when I look at the impact investment industry, one of the reasons I was so motivated to dedicate myself to the movement was it actually appeals to people who've grown up even in a very kind of classical conservative neo-economic framework, and it appeals to people who are more the social do-gooders. And Nothing is more compelling than when you get on the ground in a community and look at people of disadvantage benefiting in a sustainable way from an enterprise initiative that's meeting their needs, that is really not a handout, but it's a hand up, that is helping through business, through economics, actually improve sustainably the living standards of people. And you see this throughout the impact investment industry, and it's one of the reasons there's a movement growing to it. And I take hope from the fact that we're seeing people dedicating their wealth and their assets to both doing good and to making a financial return. And they're doing it because they have a broader view of how they'd like to align their values with their capital. So I don't think our system prevents it, but I think there are significant obstacles to actually growing the institutional sources of the capital. But change starts with the individual, and I think we're seeing the beginnings of it.
I'm Marjorie Schaub, I'm Damascus Citizen for Sustainability. You didn't mention the potency of methane, number one, the impact of fossil fuel and the impact on the soil and food production that climate change would entail, the impact of the aquifers in our country, of which certain fossil fuels would have an impact on, and also the impact of toxic materials in our air. So I was wondering if you could expand your discussion on those topics, which is part of the theme of today.
It turns out that for some issues, like food, whether we mitigate or whether we let climate change go unchecked, food is going to be affected in both cases. If you ask why have food prices gone up recently, it's because we've stopped using food to eat. We've been starting to use food for energy, and that means that it's gotten more expensive to get food because you have another source that's actually consuming it. So that's an example where on the mitigation side, as we press for ever more strict mitigation, it turns out it's going to have an impact on food for eating. But similarly, so will that also be the case if we just let climate change go unchecked. Climate change itself, if you get up into 3 and 4 degrees, will start to have an impact on the global food supply as well. So whether you go for one or the other, I guess one prediction you can make is that our food supply is going to become a critical issue for us in the future.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Gennargo, and I just recently got a master's in environmental management from Duke University. And my question is for Congressman Inglis, and it was wonderful listening to you, especially after taking your class. My question is, I really appreciate what you said about trade-offs and, climate change being very polarizing in politics. But my question is more about the politicians' constituencies. And, we heard yesterday about the 6 Americas. So you have, and so you are basically talking very much about the alarmed Alices and the dismissive, people who just don't want to deal with it. But then there's that range of people in between. And I want to know, as from your experience, or maybe for the future, how do you target those people?
Oh, yeah, great question. We got Blue Devils here, isn't this terrific? And yeah, and she took the course and survived, and so it's good. So thank you for mentioning that. So how do you get to those center people, right? This is the work of Ed Maybach at George Mason and Tony Lacerowitz at Yale. Global Warming 6 Americas, great. I think it's the analysis is very helpful. one answer, as you might recall from our class, is if you increase the sense of efficacy over all 6 Americas, then you increase the chances of them dealing with the problem. And that's why I think Professor Mendelsohn's comments are helpful about the 4 degree, because if you can move people away from this sense that the apocalypse is upon me, then I can cope a little bit better. If you give me a little bit of space to breathe, but it's a really difficult balancing act here. And so I wish I knew, I'm not going to answer the question precisely because it's really a hard balancing act, right? Because it's sort of like this. You want to give some sense of alarm so that people will act. But you don't want to overstimulate them, because if you do, you shut them down. And so that's the case in personal training, right? That's the case in, I mean, if you tell somebody, listen, you got to lose 300 of those 450 pounds you're carrying around next week. Well, that guy's going away. He's never come back, right? But if you say, here's a path forward, we can get you there. And that's why, you know, Dr. Mendelsohn mentioned geoengineering. I remember a science committee hearing where I didn't get the memo in advance about what the purpose of it was. I thought it was the nuttiest thing in the world to be sitting there talking about blasting things into the sky. And, you know, we're in the petri dish, you know, and so here we were going to experiment on ourselves. But later I got the memo, which was, no, just hang in there with it. Because if you give some people the sense of efficacy, they can cope with the problem better. So even if you think it's nuts to do something in the petri dish that you're sitting in, still talking about it causes some people to say, okay, I can cope. And so I guess the best advice I could give is, in trying to reach our target audience, which is some of those dismissive Dans, is just tone down the apocalyptic rhetoric and tune up the talk about how we can cope with this. Because if you're a hierarchical individualist, which is what Dan Kahan says conservatives are, you need this sense that you can achieve something. If you're a communitarian egalitarian, you don't have that need. But if you're a conservative, a hierarchical individualist, you need to know that you can achieve something. And so things like geoengineering and things like it's 4, not 2, give some space to those folks. And then I think they really will begin to engage. It's like chemotherapy, you know, you want to give enough to kill the cancer, but not so much you kill the patient. And that's the balance we're looking for in the messaging on climate change, I think.
Yes. Hello, my name is Abe Green. I'm a legal services attorney working for a union in the city. And my question is for Rep. Inglis. I really appreciate your willingness to build coalitions and reach people who aren't usually engaged in the environmental movement. But the one thing I take issue with is that I think it's a little bit living in the past a little bit. I mean, we've seen Barack Obama reelected by a majority of people who don't usually come out in elections. It's not just the Christian right that is driving the electorate right now. And what about building coalitions that are going to last into the future rather than looking to the past where you're depressing the vote and you're gerrymandering districts? And I think in the future we're going to have a lot more popular vote, a lot more. We're not going to have the electoral college anymore, possibly. And I think the coalitions we should be building are among labor, are among minorities, rather than among sort of I'm sorry to say, a dying breed in this country of white conservative men. So I want to know what you think about that.
Well, don't count us out just yet. I mean, we're still breathing. I'm a white conservative man, so I'm just not an angry old white man.
And you're so young.
Yes, I don't know. You just know that anytime if you encounter what you consider reactionary force, you can either try to work with that and give it some way to express itself, or you can continue to fight it head on. If you fight it head on, you're probably sort of stuck. Because, like you said, I don't think the chances of getting enough votes in the House and the Senate for pricing carbon exist on the left. The votes just aren't there. You have to have 60 votes in the Senate and 218 votes in the House, and they're just not there. And they're not going to be there for a couple of decades. Behold, you're the indispensable partner. And so now, how are you going to deal with him, the angry old white male? Well, I think what you do is you challenge him to live what he says he believes. And you say, particularly to the libertarians among us, you know, I'm a Republican, not a libertarian. There used to be a difference. But among our libertarian friends, what I'd say is, don't you believe in accountable free enterprise and transparent pricing in marketplaces? Yes, that's passionately what we believe. And I want to say this to the Koch brothers. I'm really seeking a meeting with the Koch brothers because I want to sit down with them and challenge them to live what they say they believe. They say that's what they believe. They say that's what their purpose on earth is about. Okay, let's live it. Let's put all the prices, let's put all the cost in on all the fuels and then watch what happens. And market forces would take over and exciting things would happen. And I got hope. I mean, and I may be, you know, Bevis described me as an optimistic conservative. I may be crazy in that optimism, but I think that we can challenge people to live what they say they believe.
Is there a question over here? Yes.
Hello there. Thank you for your talks. My name is Emma Kraus. I work for the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. I have a quick question. I think this would mainly be for Christina and Charlotte. Could you speak to a little bit about how government financing initiatives like the Green Bank in Connecticut, similar model in New York, initiatives in New Jersey, I'm working on a solar loan model right now, so that's why I'm curious, how those play into the kind of the investment strategies that you're talking about, and are we working together? Are we running alongside each other? How do we kind of make enough space in the market for each other?
Sure, happy to, and thanks for your question. I think we're working together. One of the things that I think is really, as Congressman Inglis said, you know, not all the prices are in there right now. And so it's a critical role of nonprofits and government and sort of the non-commercial sector is to facilitate transactions that aren't necessarily obvious to the market. And I think green banks are an incredibly powerful, figuring out how do you solve stormwater with distributed green infrastructure on everybody's block versus a giant holding tank is complicated and costly. But at the end of the day, it generates all kinds of other values that aren't necessarily priced today by the market. And so it's a really critical role, I think, for governments to try to facilitate those transactions and provide that technical support to help make them happen and buy down the cost of capital in those ways.
Hello.
We're running out of time. I think this might be so one more last question.
Okay.
Well, we're supposed to stop at 12:30. Well, let's see how long it takes to do the next question. I don't want to prolong this beyond the witching hour.
I am a biologist at Cornell, and I think fundamental to this whole process is mass balance, right? Matter is neither created nor destroyed, and that is independent of belief systems. So, and I think that's fundamental to say what Carl Sagan that you quoted, Mr. Inglis. But in the context of mass balance, I would like to ask Bevis if you could tell us what the reserve of nuclear fuel is in terms of promoting and advocating for the expansion of nuclear, given that it is also a finite natural resource.
That's for me. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to.
How sustainable nuclear power is.
Is what?
How sustainable
Oh, well, I think that there's ample amounts of plutonium and uranium to get us to a stage where we don't need nuclear anymore, which is probably 50 to 100 years. And I'm not an expert on whether we would run out, but I have not read anything about the possibility of running out of that source of energy.
Does anybody else
I mean,
have any
nuclear
insight on
would
this?
be a transitional energy source. In France now, it's a very high percentage of their energy supply. And I was simply making a point that that theological certainties have adverse side effects that are not anticipated by those who feel so fervently. And I think that one of the tragic side effects that the theocracy of the conservation movement created for us is to have killed the nuclear source of energy, thereby allowing the big oil to exploit for decades their form of energy.
So is mass balance big T or little t?
Big.
Theological, big T, theological, as in phase.
Is the idea of mass balance?
I don't know if it's a
that
big T or a little t.
Theological?
I don't think you have to go there. I think if you care about greenhouse gases, if you want to shoot for something like 2 degrees, part of that plan is that we will double our nuclear energy. We'll take all the nuclear plants we have today and double them. If we want to do something about greenhouse gases, a lot. So it's a question of how much do you care about one thing versus another. And if you care a lot about greenhouse gases, then you're going to buy into nuclear. That's one of the things you have to buy. It's because that's part of that solution, if that's what you want. That doesn't mean nuclear energy's not got its own problems.
Do you have a quick question?
Do I have a quick question?
I mean, that can have a quick answer.
Yes, young fellow. Just wait a moment. I'm putting it very quickly in my mind's eye. I'll say, I don't like to say this because it sounds egotistical, but I'm seeing that it's becoming more and more important by the hour and the minute. My name is Miles Aiken, and I'm an activist. And 5 years before Sandy, which everyone has said has awakened the city, I blocked the city. Sean Donovan, who's now head of the $59 billion of Sandy relief in the city, I blocked him from renovating my mother's building in Harlem on the principles of climate change. And I knew that, and I can see it now, I knew that other peoples would not be, as the gentleman alluded to, in the discussion of where the planet is going. My next comment would be quickly, and I think if Malcolm X was alive, he would say that people who polluted the planet are now telling us how it's going to save it. That's what I'm getting out of the third position of the program. I'm thinking, and on the woman's label, the very learned woman yesterday, so someone said something about the amount of things that China had bought, or used, fossil fuels, and we bought it. And the very learned lady yesterday said, I think about that very deeply, but I won't turn out the lights, which we're getting with the energy again, which Steve Cohen constantly stated about energy. My question quickly is, I heard the gentleman very lucidly say that cap and trade was dead, but he didn't say in the United States. He said cap and trade dead, if I heard him correctly. Would he quickly respond to the other cap and trade or carbon trading exchanges that are beginning to proliferate across the globe, i.e. China's putting in 8 centers, Australia's got theirs, the EEC, et cetera. Could you balance that for me? Because I'm very, very interested in carbon trading and cap and trade. What's happening on the international side of that for me? And I'll also add that the New York Times illustrious panel on cities developing in the United States and across the globe this last week didn't have one speck of a chocolate in the milk. The people who polluted the planet are now telling us how they're going to save it. And that's why I've been living in the streets for 6 years, to make sure that my people in Harlem know that we have something to say. But across the planet, please, on trading.
If I could just answer that quickly about the cap and trade worldwide. It's terrific that China looks like it wants to act. We gotta hope that that is a felt need on their part, and that they are therefore going to be partners in this. But the United States, just as conservatives are indispensable partners for action in the United States, and the United States, I got to believe, is the indispensable nation for action here. And so we got to figure out something that works here, and hopefully that it will work for our friends in China. And I think there is a way to do that. I guess we don't have time to go into border adjustments, but I think there is a way to do it through a border adjustment in the carbon tax. That's what I'd say.
Well, we'll thank you for all these questions, good questions, and we will now adjourn until this afternoon, I believe.